In this video, we're going to take a look at the options bar, how it appears for the bulk of our transformation tools. Now, it's an interesting thing to keep in mind that while the various transforms available in here give you different behavior for the handles of your transformation tool on your document, the behavior of the options bar is pretty much identical across the board. So it doesn't really matter which of these we activate. So what I'm going to do is just hit free transform, and we'll just start up here at the left and sort of work our way across. Now, in the very left-hand side, we have the reference point location. And for that to make any sense, you need to know what the reference point is. The reference point is this tiny little crosshair that currently exists in the middle of my transform tool. Now, if you take a look at my layer right now, layer 1, it's surrounded by these little handles. These tell you that we are currently transforming, and I can drag these handles and I can do all kinds of things to reshape my layer. However, this reference point is kind of important. If I drag it, say, up here to the corner, and I was to Alt-drag one of the corners of my actual transform tool, notice how we're scaling toward and away from that reference point. If I move my mouse outside this handle and start dragging, notice we're rotating around that reference point. So it's pretty easy to see straight out of the gate how that reference point can be pretty handy. Now I'm going to go back over to Edit and jump back down to Free Transform, or you can hit Control-T if you're trying to keep things nice and quick with the hotkeys. So what this little area does is it allows you to move that reference point to a specific location relative to the object. You can click on the little tiny box at the center and move it to the center. So if I click and drag right on the reference point and I move it back out into space again, if I click on that tiny little square in the center there, we jump it right back down to the center. Or I can move it to any one of the corners or edges based on which one of these boxes I click. Extremely straightforward. Next, we have the ability to move our object around using numerical inputs. We can also click on X and Y and we can slide our object around. So if we want to move the object in X, we can just click and drag on X, as you see here. And we can do the same thing in Y. Now the numbers you see are the actual pixel locations of that reference point, because that's kind of where all transforms are going to be based from. If you're a 3D person, and I'm not going to assume that any of you are, but if you happen to be, you can think of this like a pivot point for an object. Now this little tiny triangle here allows you to switch over to relative mode, and if you switch this on, what you end up with are values from your original location, so you can create offsets in this way. So if I set these back over to 0, this is where our object was when we invoked our transform tool. If I know that I want to move, say, 100 pixels to the right, we can say 100, and it moves over to the right. If I want to move, say, 50 pixels to the left, we'll go ahead and set it back over to 0, just to kind of get things started. I would instead say negative 50, because you got to think, you're moving in the negative x-axis, which is to the left. Internally, the axes on your document run from left to right and from bottom to top. So, positive Y will move your object up, negative Y will move it down. Very straightforward. Now moving on from here, we've got width and height controls. These are percentage based, and these allow us to rescale our object. So if I set our width over to 150%, or I don't know, 1,540%, we can see that our object gets a whole lot wider. Now, if we want to, we can constrain these two proportions together to maintain our aspect ratio. So if I set this back over to 100 and I click on our little chain here, anything that I do to 1, if I set this over to 150, the other one goes to 150 as well. And because our object is a perfect square, it will stay a perfect square because that has a 1-to-1 ratio. If we had a different type of shape, like a rectangle shape, it would maintain that aspect ratio. So if it was like a 1-to-6 ratio, it would still be a 1-to-6 ratio when we were done. Now, next to this, we have our rotation, and we can set an actual rotation number just by punching it in. So if we want to rotate this, say 15 degrees, we can type in 15, like so. Or we can click and drag on the little tiny angle here and have very, very precise control over how far we rotate, which is extremely handy. Next, we've got some skew controls. So if we skew in H, you see how we're skewing. We're basically turning the object into kind of a parallelogram. And let me go ahead and set that back over to 0, and let me set my rotation back to 0 to make that a little easier to see. We can also scale vertically, so it's horizontal and vertical skewing. If I said scale just then, I didn't mean to, I meant skewing. And again, it's just kind of making a parallelogram shape. Very, very easy. Now, moving on from here, we've got the ability to turn on warp transformation. I don't really want to get into exactly what it is, but I will show that you can click on it and you get this really cool grid of stuff, and I'm not even going to touch anything on it because we're going to dedicate a whole video to how awesome that is, and I don't want to spoil it. So there will be a video over the actual warp tool. So if we go under transform, you'll see warp right there. That's when we're going to be discussing that. So if you want to jump straight to that video, I understand. Now, if you don't like what you've got when you transform, let's say we just, this weird parallelogram shape is awful and we don't want to keep it, we can click here to cancel our transformation, but I don't think I ever do that. I generally only hit the escape key. So, boom. Just hit that and you're done, and I'll go ahead and just hit Control-T to get back over here. And then you've also got the ability to commit your transform, which again I never do because you can always hit Enter and keep your transform. It's very, very, very easy to do. So that is a rundown of the options bar for the bulk of our transform tools. There are some exceptions. For instance, if we were to try Puppet Warp or Content Aware Scale, our options bar will be a little different, but I'll talk about those in those respective videos because those are very specialized tools. And they're actually extremely cool. So we'll get to those here in a little bit. However, that will wrap things up for this video. Thanks for watching.